Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating story from the world of decentralized finance that's, well, it's kind of like a corporate divorce that happened right after a major victory. It's a weird one.
So let's jump right in because this really is a puzzle. A crypto project called Iagon wins a critical vote on a platform, and what's their next move? They pack up 90% of their stuff and leave. So why? Why would you do that?
Okay, so the whole thing kicks off when Iagon makes this really sudden, really big move that basically sent shockwaves through its community. And we're not talking small potatoes here. They decided to pull approximately 90% of their liquidity from a really popular decentralized exchange called Minswap. I mean, that's a massive chunk of their assets on the platform, just gone in one decisive action.
But here's what's really interesting. This wasn't just them cashing out and going home. No, this was a deliberate shift. Iagon moved all that liquidity directly from Minswap over to a competitor, WingRiders. They weren't just leaving, they were very pointedly choosing a new partner.
Now, when we say liquidity, what are we talking about? Well, Iagon was a liquidity provider, or LP. Think of it like this. LPs provide the pools of assets that make trading even possible on these platforms. They're the ones putting the fuel in the tank. Without them, the whole system just grinds to a halt. They are, quite literally, the lifeblood of the system.
At first glance, this might seem like a pretty straightforward business decision, right? Maybe they just got a better deal somewhere else. But that's what makes the timing of all this so bizarre.
You see, this big move happened right after Minswap held a huge community vote. And here's the real kicker. The outcome was exactly what Iagon wanted. The option they supported, what they called the correct option, it passed. They won.
And this is the million-dollar question that Iagon themselves actually posed in their public statement. It is the absolute key to understanding this whole situation. They won the battle, but for some reason, they felt like they'd already lost the war. But why?
Well, Iagon made it crystal clear that this had nothing to do with profits or fees. Their decision was driven by something much deeper, a fundamental disagreement on principles. This was a clash over governance and ultimately control.
For Iagon, it came down to a few things that were just non-negotiable. They needed to have full control over the voting rights that came with their assets, full control over the rewards, and they absolutely needed a direct say in any governance that affected them.
And in the world of DeFi, all that governance stuff is handled by something called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. Just think of it like a member-run leadership council for the platform, where all the big decisions are made by community votes.
So here's where things went off the rails. The Minswap DAO held a vote that, in Iagon's eyes, crossed a major line. The vote was about assets that belonged to liquidity providers, like Iagon, but it treated those assets as if they were part of the DAO's own piggy bank. It raised a huge question about boundaries.
And this quote from Iagon, man, it just says everything. See, even though they won the vote, the fact that the vote was held at all just completely shattered their trust in the platform's governance.
For Iagon, this wasn't some minor disagreement. They felt that vote should never, ever have even been on the table. It introduced what they called unnecessary legal and governance risk because it started blurring the lines of who actually owns what. A fundamental boundary had been tested, and that created this cloud of uncertainty that just winning a vote couldn't make go away.
So, what do you do when the trust is gone? You find a new partner. And after an experience like that, Iagon's criteria for that new partner were crystal clear.
Their search wasn't about finding the best financial deal. It was about finding the best partner, someone who was on the exact same page when it came to their core values on control, ownership, and how things should be run. And they found that in WingRiders. The difference was like night and day. On one hand, you had Minswap, where the control of your own assets had suddenly become a question mark. On the other hand, you had WingRiders, who was able and willing to guarantee the level of control Iagon demanded. It was a perfect philosophical fit.
So you might be thinking, why does one project moving its funds really matter to the rest of us? Well, because this specific story points to a much bigger, much more profound question for the entire decentralized world. It's setting a precedent.
The real takeaway here is that in DeFi, the process can be way more important than the outcome. This whole thing was a huge warning shot for every DAO out there. It showed that stomping on the autonomy of your users' assets can be far more damaging than any market crash, because it eats away at the one thing these systems are built on: trust.
And that leaves us with this critical question to chew on, one that's going to define the future of these platforms. As these new financial systems grow up, where should the ultimate power and ownership actually be? With the individual user who puts up the assets, or with the collective DAO that governs the platform?